Hello and welcome to Other Voices, brought to you by Peninsula Peace and Justice Center. I'm your host, Paul George. Joining me for this first segment, I'm pleased to welcome Allam Dalati. Allam is a prostheticist who volunteers his time at clinics in Turkey and in Syria, fitting prosthetic limbs for people who have been wounded by the terrible violence there. Allam Dalati, welcome to Other Voices. Glad to have you here.
Pleased to be here, sir.
So before I get into your story, I just want to ask you, there was a little bit of news today, unfortunately. I know you've been on a plane, so I hope you've heard about this and that I'm not taking you by surprise. Sadly, the United Nations World Food Program announced yesterday, and it's being reported today, that because of a lack of money from international donors, they have to suspend the food voucher program for 1.7 million Syrian refugees. Your reaction?
Another injury to the Syrian people.
Another injury, yeah. Most of these people, that's their only source of food, is it not?
I really don't know, to be honest with you.
I know you don't actually get into the refugee camps.
I don't get into the camps that much. There is always a food shortage, many shortages.
Yeah.
But the food, yes. And now, of course, heating oil with the winter coming.
Heating oil is
That's going to be
also
a big problem,
wow.
yeah, because it gets pretty cold in parts of Syria.
Is the United Nations supplying that as well, or is that dependent on some of the private aid?
Not to my knowledge, and again, I kind of stay in my realm, which is a very small niche.
Very specialized, I understand that.
I try not to get involved in anything. I have enough on my plate.
Right.
So I really don't know. I know we had a lot of problems when I was working at the hospital of injuries due to people stealing wood.
Huh.
They would go to orchards and cut down the trees so they heat their...
For warmth, yeah.
For warmth, yeah. That was a problem.
So let's talk about your project. You were in private practice in, I've lost my notes about you, in Arkansas, was it?
Yes.
You're still in private practice.
Yeah, I have a private practice in Northwest Arkansas.
And you're part Syrian. Were you born there, or?
No, I was born in Michigan,
Uh-huh.
but my parents, my father is Syrian, my mother is American, and at 2.5 years, they decided to go back to Syria, so I was raised in Damascus.
Ah, I see.
And after I got the baccalaureate, I got out of there soon.
Okay. So in 2000, though, you set up the project that you called the Charitable Limb.
Well, what happened is,
Yeah, go ahead.
after I graduated from high school, I swore I'd never go back to Syria.
Uh-huh.
And 20 years passed, and I guess I got older and wiser. And I wanted to find out what were the needs for Syria as far as prosthetics and orthotics. And so I got on a plane and went back there just to check it out.
And so that was your first time back?
And that was my first time in 20 years, and I found out there was quite a shortage. This is way before the war. This is in the year 2000.
Yeah.
So I came back here and started the Charitable Limb, hoping that I would set up a center in Syria, because they were, back then, this is before the war, they were in dire need of a center for prosthetics and orthotics and rehab, underlying all three.
Yeah. The rehab is obviously an essential component of this.
Correct.
You don't just strap on a prosthetic and go walking down the street.
As I say, it's not like buying a hamburger. You just don't go get a hamburger and away you go. But nothing ever happened. And so I would just go once a year during the month of Ramadan. I would go to Damascus, to the public hospital in Damascus. It's called the Muassat Hospital. And there I would fit the needy with limbs. But I would also treat the local physicians and staff in protocols of prosthetics and rehab. And that went on until the hostilities broke out, and it was no longer safe for me to go to Damascus.
Yeah.
So I started going to other parts, to northern Syria.
So talk about those early trips after the...
Well, the early trips,
the uprising
it was kind of a
began
wing and a prayer. I had not gone to Syria for over a year, and there were a lot of amputees that I used to see.
And
a lot of them are
this
children.
Was 2011, 2012?
Yeah, 2011. I could not see many of my patients that I've followed through for years, especially the children. And I didn't want to stay home. And so I packed 6 bags and I headed to Turkey, to southern Turkey, right on the border with Syria. There I spent about a month just trying to find who to talk to, where to go, because it was no man's land.
Yeah, even how to get across the border? Or,
oh, well, yeah, eventually I was able to do that. There are a lot of NGOs who are foreigners, physicians, technicians. The border is very porous. There are many different ways to get in, but also
apparently
the UN.
So.
Yes,
all kinds of people are.
But the UN also will issue a special ID for medical personnel, and we go through a non-official border crossing in a town called Otme. And so eventually, you know, I got into Syria. It took me a month. I was fitting limbs in Antakya, Turkey, in a small apartment. And then as I got acclimated.
How are you finding the patients?
Oh. At the time, I was the only person in Turkey fitting limbs to Syrians. I would do my rounds. I'd go to different rehab hospitals that were set up by Syrians right along the border. And I would visit them, introduce myself, and say, you know, this is what I do, and I'm offering my services for free. And pretty soon they'll come out of the woodwork. You don't have to go anywhere.
The word will get around.
Yeah. But the Turks kind of cracked down, and I don't blame them. There was too much traffic going back and forth. Eventually, they shut down quite a few of these facilities due to licensure. They didn't have proper permits. That happened later on. But in the beginning, when I started, it was a free-for-all. You just, wherever you can set up shop, the Turks were kind enough to look the other way, the Turkish authorities. And so many rehab facilities, micro-hospitals developed along the border on the Turkish side to treat the Syrians. That has changed now. But I started, as I said, in a small apartment in Antakya. And then eventually, as I developed my contacts, I went into Syria, because that's where I wanted to be. I wanted to be in Syria. I didn't want to be in Turkey. And that was my first visit. The second visit, I spent 3 months at a hospital, at a field hospital in Syria, in Idlib, province of Idlib.
Who was running the field hospital? Was it NGOs? Or?
Yeah, there are different NGOs. This NGO was financed by a Kuwaiti outfit from Kuwait. So they would hire all the local staff and physicians, Syrians, but they would foot the bill. And they were they were doing operations, mainly operations, and I was fitting prosthetics. But they were very short-handed, so I would help them in the OR room and the ER, and so it was.
I imagine
it was an interesting time of my life. Yes,
yeah.
As I told many, I lived in 3 months more than I did in 10 years.
Wow.
It was quite an experience.
Yeah, I'll bet.
So, and then I would set up shop there for the next few trips, and they would just come from all over Syria, including Damascus, to be fitted.
Once again, just word of mouth.
Word of mouth.
There was someone there.
It was
that
just
could
word
do
of
this.
mouth, yeah. And the problem with prosthetics, what a lot of people don't realize is, as you mentioned earlier, it's not hand them the prostheses and away you go. No, there is training, but I only see them. I'll do some gait training with their first fitting, and then they'll come back for a follow-up, and then that's it. Until the next visit, until I'm there for the next visit. But the problem is, in the case of children or newly amputated individuals, the residual limb shrinks. So after you fit someone with a prosthesis, within 6 months, it's time for another socket. The socket is the part that between the man and the machine. Yes, that needs to be replaced. And in children, depending on if they go through a growth spurt, in 6 months, sometimes 3 months, you have to change the socket.
Wow.
And that is really frustrating that I cannot follow up on a
Yeah, I
lot
was
of
going to
these.
say that.
So not only do I have new patients coming in, but I have the old ones that need follow-up adjustments.
Yeah. And
It gets pretty hectic.
what about the actual material that you use to
Well,
make the
over the years,
prosthetics?
I've developed my own system. Now, in the regular world, we make our sockets out of plastic, thermoplastic, or it's made out of acrylic. It's a laminated socket. Well, I don't have all that, so I have to build them on the patient. I've developed a system over the, let's see, 14 years that I've been doing this.
Yeah.
That in the case of a BK prosthesis, a BK being below knee,
Below
AK above knee. So
Okay.
if I start mentioning this, you know, just this
I'll
is
make
what.
a note.
Yeah, a BE would be below elbow, TK would be through knee.
Through knee. Okay.
Okay, so
We're all learning a lot along
Right.
with you.
so on your standard below knee or BK prostheses, I would the patient would sit down, and then I would build the mold or the socket right on them as they sit there. So within 2 hours, they walk out. We're usually here in the States. If we rush it, it'll be a week,
Uh-huh.
2 weeks. There, it's 2 hours.
Yeah.
And then they'll come back for follow-up.
But you had to come up with this system.
Yeah,
to
I use
adapt to the
fiberglass,
situation.
the
Yeah.
same stuff you use for when you break your arm. When you put your arm in a cast, that fiberglass
Uh-huh.
tape, that's what I make it out of. I
Wow.
make it right on them.
And what about the extension?
The extension, I don't know how technical you want to get.
I know you're going to have to get somewhat technical, so
Okay,
just try to
prosthetics,
explain it best.
in the old days, they used to be called exoskeletal. In other words, it was like a piece of wood that was hollowed out for where the limb goes, and
Right.
then you put a shoe on
It
the
made
bottom.
it kind of look like a leg.
It's called exoskeletal. The support is from the outside, like your old wooden legs.
Uh-huh.
Endoskeletal is where you have a socket, then you have a metallic pipe, which is attached to a foot. The nice thing about it is it's modular, so you can adjust it. You can change the alignment. You can shorten it, lengthen it. There are many
Yeah.
avenues or many advantages to endoskeletal, and all the modern world now is endoskeletal. Rarely do you see an exoskeletal.
Yeah.
So
So,
the-
those parts you can take along with you
Right.
and adjust them for each
Right,
patient. Oh, okay.
but these parts are very expensive.
Yeah.
Very expensive medical field, and I wouldn't be able to do it if it wasn't for many people in the prosthetic industry that would donate, including my patients. Some of my patients would donate their old prostheses. Limbs for Life was extremely helpful in donating componentry for this. And most of the supplies I use, including the casting tape, which is by a company, I need to plug this in for them. They've helped me for over the years.
Sure.
It was Johnson & Johnson, now it's BSN, but they have supplied me with all the casting tape. And we're talking about a lot of money
Yeah.
for this stuff.
Well, it's nice to hear.
Yeah, and there are actually 2 companies here in this part of California, Kingsley. All the feet most of them come from a company called Kingsley, which is out here in the Bay. Wonderful person, wonderful family and company. And Hosmer is another company that supplies me with all my upper componentry parts, and they're extremely expensive. And
Yeah.
it's, again, they donate, no questions asked.
Well, it's nice to hear because
And that's that. Otherwise, I couldn't pull this off.
Yeah,
There's
there
no
is
way
kind
I
of
could pull
an
this off.
impression out there that there's huge profits to be made in
Well,
medical
there is.
care.
Prosthetics is a very lucrative business.
Yeah.
I mean, that's how I was able to do what I did in the past. Is my private practice funded my activities overseas, but of late I've been doing so much traveling, it's kind of killed my practice. So there's no more income.
Yeah.
And so now I have to
And
run
yet
around
you
with
keep
my
doing it.
Yes, yeah, it's a bug I can't kick.
Yeah.
But yeah, there are many parties that have helped me out in this crusade, you might
Yeah.
say.
So you talked about your first couple of trips, the first one, then you were back for 3
Yeah.
months. How did
Yeah.
the situation change as the war got worse
It
and
was,
worse?
I tell you, Paul, when I first went to Syria, I tell the story on my Facebook. I don't know if you read it or not. But
I read.
I had problems with.
I think I read your whole Facebook.
With transportation was my big problem. Was how am I going to get around to the different hospitals in Turkey and then back and forth to Syria? And I finally came up with the idea of buying a motorcycle and traveling back and forth. I love motorcycles. I ride one here in the States, so that was just another excuse for me.
You look kind of like a motorcycle guy.
So when I first, the Turks put up many different flags, but they ironed them all out and let me go into Turkey with a motorcycle that had Turkish plates, which is a big no-no. I mean, it's just unallowed. But
to go into Syria.
Yeah, I was known as the humanitarian, the American humanitarian that rides a motorcycle. At the borders, it came to the point they wouldn't bother me. They just recognized who I was and they let me go through. But anyway, when I first went into Syria, it was 4 months after it was liberated. And I tell you, it was like driving into Camelot. It was a wonderful feeling. Huh. There were no checkpoints, no traffic. I didn't see anyone with arms and no tanks, nothing. It was just beautiful. It was just free.
This is still northern Syria? Or?
This is northern Syria,
yeah.
Right? Idlib. That has all changed now. It's completely changed. It's no longer Camelot.
Yeah.
But now, you asked me about my trips.
What's the scene look like now?
Now, the border is kind of like a crossing between East and West Germany back in the old days.
Huh.
So if you had an Iron Curtain.
Yeah.
A lot of regulations and a lot of checkpoints that you have to go through. They only allow so many cars a day. There's a lot of traffic coming into Syria in the form of trucks. They're bringing all kinds of food, building equipment. I mean, there's just miles and miles of trucks on the Turkish side waiting to come into Syria. So they really got overburdened, the officials, with so much traffic going back and forth. And when Syria was liberated, you used to have to get a special permission through the Syrian government to cross over into Turkey. They were kind enough now to waive all that. So if you had a Syrian passport, you could just cross, even if it was expired. Because there's an old relation, there's an old friendship, you might say, between Turkey and Syria. And they still honor it to this day, which is really nice. That's really nice. But it has changed, yes. When I was there last month, it wasn't as bad as it was my last visit, which was a year plus ago. At that time, they were having serious problems with smugglers, smuggling fuel into Turkey. It was big business. And so they'd had checkpoints. My gosh, every few kilometers there was a checkpoint. And people trying to profiteer off the fuel that's traveling. And then you had shakedowns and other armed personnel, shady characters.
Right.
That's all gone to a certain extent. To a certain extent, that's gone now. The Turks really cracked down on the border, so there's no more smuggling. And on the Syrian side, the fighting...
They stopped the oil coming out?
Yeah, there was diesel. The Syrian rebels found big caches of diesel in Syria.
Huh.
And so they were divvying it out and smuggling it. And it's depending on who you talk to, you hear different stories.
Sure.
But there was a big problem with them, because diesel is fuel. Turkey, I think, as far as Europe, Turkey is the most expensive as far as buying fuel. So they were smuggling diesel and most of the cars in Turkey are run on diesel. Europe too, it's cheaper. So there are millions being made by smuggling diesel from Syria to Turkey, and that stopped now. And that really helped. That curbed a lot of the violence along the border. So my last visit there, it was pretty peaceful. No checkpoints. It was really nice to see. The border on the Syrian side, though, is still hectic. It's still run by militia.
Can you describe which faction is
No,
in control
it's
in
not.
this
This
area?
is
Because I imagine.
This is the problem in Syria. You have too many chiefs and not enough Indians.
Yeah.
There are many factions. You don't know. For example, for the last year and a half before I've been absent Syria, and this is when Daesh came into, or what they call ISIS here.
Yeah.
Came into the area. They took over the hospital and they took over the entire area, and they told me, Allam, don't come. You can't come.
Yeah.
So I waited a long time before I went back. By then the hospital had dissolved. The backers were no longer funding the hospital, so that went awry. And
Is that
kind of
because
quieted.
Daesh was now in charge,
No,
ISIS? Or?
no, this is after Daesh. So since there was no money coming in from the smuggling, and the fighting was no longer in that part of Syria, it had migrated to another part, it kind of quieted down. And even of late, this is something else that I didn't mention in my Facebook. Syria did not allow, it's kind of like Cuba, they didn't allow new cars to come in. They would, you'd have to go through a lot of hoops and pay a lot of money to get a car in Syria. Huh. Well, after the regime fell in that part, cars were coming in by the droves. By the droves. The cheapest way to get into a car in Syria would cost you about $20,000. Now you can buy one for $4,000.
A new car?
No, not new.
Just
these are
any
used
kind of
cars. Yeah, these are just used cars. But a car is a car.
Yeah.
So
transportation is transportation.
This was nice that you could get transportation for cheap. The bad part was we're getting more accidents. A lot more accidents because it's lawless. No police. Yeah. No traffic control. And now the number one culprit in limb loss in Syria were traffic accidents. Just way back, I'm talking in 2000. And now you've got scooters and cars just running all over the place. There are no signals. There's no power. Yeah. So you could imagine the accidents that we were getting at the hospital.
So when you started, it was a lot of.
Well, yeah. Not only do we have the fighters to work
victims,
with, not only
war victims, now back to traffic accident victims.
Yeah, we would have horrific traffic accidents on scooters.
You told me when we were exchanging some email, and I was trying to get an idea of your program, that the Turkish authorities wouldn't let you into the refugee camps. Is that right?
Yeah, you have to have credentials through the UN. When I first came, I thought, I'd be able to walk in. But it turns out, no, they don't want strangers to go in there, and I don't blame them. I don't blame them. That is their realm. But they ended up coming to the apartment instead to be fitted.
Yeah. Okay. So. I think we have a question in our audience here. Crystal, if you can bring the microphone up this way. We're never sure if we're going to have many questions from the audience or not. And up front here was Steffi.
I was just saying you got 5 minutes.
Oh, you were signaling me 5 minutes. Never mind. Okay. Do we have any questions in the audience? All right, Crystal, come back. We do have a question. Up here in the front row. Ida.
Yeah, I want to know, other than the traffic, what about all the bombs and cluster bombs and all these internationally unauthorized use of force on the civilians? How does that factor into your LIMB program?
Well, there's already enough on my plate as is. Of late, we're getting a lot of people from Aleppo, because of the drums. They're dropping those 55-gallon drums filled with nails and shrapnel and anything else they can find. It's pretty much an 55-gallon, 200-pound anti-personnel bomb that they're dropping anywhere and everywhere. And actually, one of them I fitted, again, on Facebook. If you follow it, there's a picture of a little girl, 10 years old, named Hiba. And she was standing on her balcony when one of those drums fell and took out both her legs. And she was fitted at Kilis. That's where my last trip, because I couldn't get my luggage out of, we discussed this too. the Turks would not release my bags of prosthetic componentry, so I worked with a group in Kilis. Real quick, since we're running out of time, there are only 2 organizations that are fitting limbs in southern Turkey or northern Syria. One is in Reyhaniye, Turkey, and one is in Kilis. One fits about 50 limbs a month, and the one I went to, they just opened, they're fitting about 30 to 40 limbs. And so I was there on a kind of a crash course, teach them how to fit limbs, and I did a bunch myself there. And this young girl, I told you, was one of them. She had lost both her legs. And so, yeah, and now she's, I need to go back within definitely 6 months, because she'll need new sockets. She'll need, she'll have, she would have outgrown.
Needs to be refitted,
yes,
as you
refitted,
explained.
yes, yeah.
Well, I really appreciate you bringing kind of a different vision than of the reality for civilians there. Maybe we can do an online Google Hangout to follow up on some other things in the future. It's something we're doing.
Sure.
You mentioned your Facebook page. If you're on Facebook, just search for the Charitable Limb and you'll find it. Lots of photos, lots of stories from your travels. Online, thecharitablelimb.com. Check out how you may get involved and help, which probably means making a donation, but check that out online.
And they could, if a lot of, I want to pitch this out one. If they don't want to donate, that's fine, but I'll take used limbs. That's why I have a serious shortage of limbs now. Now, Limbs for Life helps a lot, but I need more.
Okay.
So if people want to donate their old limb, that they can, there's a tax, the Charitable Limb is a 501c3 nonprofit organization, so they can write it off. Anything they donate, it will be written off, including a used prosthesis.
Used prosthesis. I've been practicing saying that all week, and I'm glad I made it through.
Yeah, you want to say that right, you can get in trouble.
Yeah, that's right. Allam Dalati from the Charitable Limb, thanks so much for joining us here on Other Voices.
Pleasure is all mine.
And all of you watching at home, check out thecharitablelimb.com.